Everybody, please welcome writer, director, Joel Edgerton.
Hello. Hey. Thank you.
Well, Joel, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
One of the things I greatly admire about your approach to the film is that you don't make anybody, even the person that we would think as a villain, they're all complex characters. Can you tell us about approaching those characters in that, with that vision?
Well, when I first read the memoir, the thing that really grabbed me, well, for a start, Garrett, the author of the memoir, had dedicated the film to his parents, so he wasn't willing to vilify them. You know, you've seen the film. His mother had such a wonderful roundabout, and she's the heroic, the real hero of the piece, who is kind of the reason when I read the memoir, I was like, this needs to be a film. You know, somebody who was complicit in sending him to the conversion therapy, and then had a roundabout about making a different choice. But he wasn't willing to vilify them. He wasn't willing to vilify even the conversion therapists. What he was really putting on the slab was the practice itself. He had such empathy for everybody involved. You know, because I'd come to the book thinking, okay, you know, I had had fascination with lockable facilities, prisons, asylums, all sorts of things. As a child and as a film watcher, as a acting student, and then as a filmmaker, I love watching movies about prisons and breakouts and cults and all sorts of stuff.
Well, but I wish I was your therapist and ask you what was that all about. But
well, I'll tell you what it's about. It's a bunch of different things. My grandmother, who I used to stay with a lot, used to let me watch the most horrific stuff when I was way too young. There was a TV show called Prisoner about a female prison, and I used to be able to watch that when I was 8, 9 years old. And I think it became the foundation for all of my nightmares. And as a Catholic boy, my prayers as well, please God, don't send me to one of these places, you know. But so I went into the book fascinated, in a morbid curiosity kind of way. What I came out of the book with was a completely different thing that I didn't expect, which was that I'd gone in expecting this as hateful people sending their kids to a place run by hateful people. And I was surprised to think, as I finished the book, that Garrett's parents had sent him to conversion therapy out of an act of love, thinking they could help him. And that really confused me. And it was one of the first things that really surprised me, and the thing that made me want to, as I said, the thing that made me want to make the movie was his mother's roundabout decision, because I'm fascinated by people, because we all make mistakes, and I'm fascinated by the moment that people make mistakes and are willing in the aftermath of that to re-examine the choices they've made. And Garrett's mother, to me, and I've met her, I've met the whole family, I mean, to me, she's one of the great heroes that I've ever met.
But, we're used to films where we have to establish the protagonist, we have to establish the antagonist, but you were so, in your writing and directing, you're so humane to people's convictions and beliefs. And there's no villain in this film.
I really don't think there. Look, no doubt. Let's acknowledge the fact that there are kids whose parents are diabolical. There are kids who need to separate themselves from their parents. There are people that are out there to out and out abuse their children, like LGBTQ issues aside, like physical abuse, sexual abuse. But Garrett's parents really truly believed that they were trying to help him, and I think that that was a more honest rendition of the story, because I think it paves the way, or it creates a fertile ground for conversation, because there are people limited by their understanding and standing on the foundation of their religious beliefs or other beliefs that are not trying to hurt their children. They think they're trying to help them, and I think that it creates a space for a conversation that needs to be had about this practice, which, it's still happening. It's very much happening today. It's happening in the United States in a massive way. It's happening in Australia, in the UK, where I was just at promoting the film. So I didn't want to make a film that easily created a situation of heroes and villains, because this is a much more complex issue than that, I think.
Which, the character you play, Sykes, is such a... I mean, every character in your film is incredibly complex, but yours, Sykes, it would have been so easy to vilify him, and instead, it's an incredible portrait of somebody who's actually doing bad things, but at the same time, my heart breaks because he's actually a survivor himself. I mean, he's a victim.
Yeah, I think there's a whole movie to be made about Victor Sykes, right? His real name is John Schmidt, and I had lunch. I'm glad I'm talking to you after the film, because I had lunch with him 3 months before I started shooting the film.
And what was I like?
I was sitting opposite him and his husband, Larry. And, John used to restore souls, and now he and his husband restore furniture. And he was, to his credit, he was a consultant on the film. He was at the New York premiere of the film. He was available to me to be open about the practices that he pushed on to many, 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 many children. And as a result, you got to talk about the spin-off to the damage that it caused to so many families, and the amount of people that are no longer walking the earth because of conversion therapy. I'm talking about characters like Cameron, who committed suicide. And it was bizarre because, I had watched footage of him in 2005. Okay, so the end of Victor Sykes, or John as his real name is, the end of his tenure at Love in Action came as a result of a young boy called Zach, who in 2005, thank God for the internet, he was about to be sent to Love in Action, and he wrote online, "My parents are about to send me to this place. I'm terrified, and here are some of the rules." And he published them on MySpace. And within a day and a half, there was a picket line outside of Love in Action. And John had to basically come out and do a press conference. And you got to understand, up until that point, he was like a hero. Talk about different circles. So within his circle, he was a hero in his community because he was the fix-it guy, He would go around to different churches and he'd say, there's this problem that'll keep coming up, and if you have that problem, come to me. And then all of a sudden he was in front of, NBC and CNN cameras, and he had to publicly, at a press conference, declare his point of view. So I'd seen footage of him back then in 2005, and then I was meeting him at a Cracker Barrel. And the reason I mention that, I don't know if you know, but as we were leading into the film, one of the wonderful things my line producer did was publish a list of businesses that were unfriendly to the LGBTQ community. And high on that list is Cracker Barrel. And so strange that he would suggest a Cracker Barrel as a meeting place. But he was very open to talking about his point of view back then and his point of view right now.
And you mentioned LGBT. What? And you're not gay. And what is it about this story that spoke to you that you felt that you needed to not just write and adapt it, but direct it?
I think it's the purity of injustice, you know. I draw a straight line between...
Pun intended.
I draw a curved line, a curved but straight-ish line between this and a movie I did called Loving with Jeff Nichols. Right?
But you also directed The Gift, which is about a bullied gay man.
Yeah. It's a lot of people, I've been recently pointing that out, that there's a very small plot point in The Gift where a story made up in order to bully the character I play in The Gift is that he was seen with a man in a car, and it's that he was basically, you know, falsely accused of being gay and beaten almost to death by his father. But the thing about Loving was, Loving, you know, which is about a, you know, interracial couple in the 60s, brought me in the aftermath in the press talking about, you know, the current situation 2 years ago about not interracial marriage, about marriage equality. And I'm from Australia, if you can't guess. And at the time, shamefully, Australia hadn't quite got there in terms of marriage equality. And it brought me in contact with a lot of LGBTQ groups and advocates and wonderful groups like GLAAD and the Trevor Project. And when I read the memoir Boy Erased, it gave me the same feeling I had when I read Loving, which is like, what if, for whatever reason, colour of skin, gender, sexual persuasion, whatever it is that's out of your control, you're persecuted for that. And I'm a, you know, white middle-class Australian guy. I've never, ever experienced any kind of injustice. And Loving got me so in touch and so inflamed by the theme of injustice that when I read Boy Erased, I was just so daily obsessed with this story that I had to do something about it.
Well, you know, thank you for using your status and power to be able to give voice to something like this. It's incredible.
Thank you. And look, I have to say, I mean, you know, initially because I'm not of the LGBTQ community, I was like, well, I'm not qualified to make this. I think there's a very current and hot and very important discussion about representation. You know, particularly as an actor, I, you know, hear that discussion about, you know, as an actor, what roles are you allowed to play and what roles are you not allowed to play? And then when, I think it was last year or the year before, Catherine Bigelow had made Detroit. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of other instances where I realised that discussion is also very hot behind the camera. It's like, all right, well, as a director, what stories are you allowed to tell? And so I was very cognizant of that fact. And I was like, well, I want to help make this movie. When I first read the memoir, I was like, I could be a producer. And then every day I was in Budapest, I was shooting Red Sparrow, and I had a lot of time off because I was number 2 on the call sheet. Jennifer Lawrence was busy, you know, running point on that for me, so I had like a couple of weeks off here and there. And every day I was thinking about Garrett's story, and I was like, all right, one day I just started writing scenes from the book, and I just realised, well, maybe as an ally, as somebody very passionate about the story, maybe I can get rid of the reticence that I had to get behind the camera. And I was like, well, if nobody else is going to make this movie, because the book had sat on the shelf for about a year before my producer optioned the rights. I'm like, you know, fuck it, I'm gonna do it.
Well, thank you. And you know, tell us about meeting Garrett Conley, who wrote the book, and it's his story, and his involvement in your development of the story.
There's a couple of really weird synchronistic things that happened there. Garrett, like a few months into us working together, told me the story that when he was in the process of finishing the book, he went back to where he went to the facility, which I subsequently went and visited. I did a big research trip, went and met with his mum and dad, and went to the church and went to all the places where Love in Action used to be housed. And so just to refresh his memory, and, you know, I'm sure because it was a traumatic experience, he went back to Love in Action. It had since shut down, but he just wanted to remind himself of fact-checking. And he was there with his mum, the beautiful, I call her like the superhero in pearls, his mum. And they had a few hours to kill. And they were like, well, let's go see a movie, you know. And they went to the cinema and they saw The Gift. And so years later, you know, well, 3 years later or 2 years later, when he got a phone call saying I was interested in meeting with him because I'd read the book, he was like, oh, that's totally weird. And I met him in a cafe in Brooklyn. I flew back from Budapest to go meet him. And he tells me, and this mate like totally freaked me out, that he sent his husband in without my knowledge just to check that he wasn't like in some weird, like he was like, can you just come into the cafe and make sure that I'm actually meeting with Joel, because I don't think this is true. And little did I know that his husband had just floated in and went, yep, he's there. But I asked him, one of the first things I said is, can I meet with other survivors of conversion therapy, which we did. And he told me that he was very emaciated during that time because he'd become very stressed. And I said, can I look at photos of you, you know, when you were 19? And this is when Nicole and Russell come into it. I saw the photos and I was like, oh, okay. I'm going to have to reach out to Nicole and Russell, because that's exactly who was staring back at me out of the family photos. And you saw the photos, in particular Russell, like without makeup, without anything. Like, I was like, oh no, I've got to reach out to Russell Crowe. And I say, oh no, not because for any other reason that he was the guy that I kind of hero worshipped when I was trying to be an actor, because Russell had a very sharp machete and he was cutting his way through the forest to LA, and then he stood on top of the mountain, and I was like, how can I direct this guy that I've held in such high esteem for all those years?
You do some beautiful directorial choices that I want to dive into. The fact that the sets are claustrophobic, the tones, the colors, you muted the colors. You know, can you talk about your choices that you made?
I wanted Love in Action and the facility to reflect what I saw, you know, because I went to two places that Love in Action had been in. They'd been in a corporate facility while they were waiting for a church to be bequeathed to them, or, you know, built for them. I can't remember, but both of those places, I tell you what, like, you know, there's a 2020 expose about conversion therapy. And it's also worth acknowledging that there are barbed wire facilities. There are like torture facilities. There are places where kids get electric shock treatment. There's an old school practice, you know, because because it's not sanctioned, they pick and choose therapies from all over the place. So, one practice which may shock you but not really surprise you is get a kid to shove their hand in a bucket of ice while looking at male iconography as a way that they used to almost like reprogram lab rats, But Love in Action, given that Garrett's parents really loved him, when they rocked up to that place, they were like, carpets are clean, people seem well dressed, the pamphlets are well printed. I feel okay about leaving my child here. There was something corporate and safe about the place that you can imagine, and I've met the parents and I love them dearly. I know why they felt safe, and this is what you got to understand. This is why I couldn't vilify them. Is given the understanding, given that you're fed the information that sexuality can be changed, which is a terrible thing to feed somebody, given that they were spouting an 84% success rate, which I'm sure they just plucked out of the air like a grape, and given the belief that if I'm sure there's people in here who are deeply religious, and I was as a younger man, like your relationship with God, your relationship with your parents may be at that age the two most important relationships you have. If somebody tells you that you're going to lose both of those things, yes, you would sign up, especially if somebody told you that there is a possibility that you could turn everything around and come back safely to a community that's going to, more appropriately accept you. And even for the parents to think, like my mantra with Nicole and Russell, and everybody, in fact, was like, let's imagine that Lucas's character, that Garrett, the real person, or Jared as he's called in the film, is addicted to heroin, which, I can relate to addiction. I can go, well, and Love in Action by that point had appropriated the 12-step program as their therapy. Sexuality is akin to an addiction as a choice. Imagine he's addicted to heroin and that's a bad road that he's walking down, and you can save him. So the fact that those parents acted out of love, thinking that they could help him, is much more terrifying to me than hateful parents and hateful practitioners who are just like, I'm going to punish you because you're gay. It's like, I want to help you because you're gay. And that to me, the biggest thing is, my parents are everything to me, and the thought that they could ever look at me at a point where I had done nothing wrong and tell me that there was something wrong with me, I could really relate to that as the most damaging thing that could possibly ever happen.
Tell us about working with Nicole and her transformation into her character.
Nicole, as I don't need to say this, but Nicole is amazing. I've heard Nicole time and time again say that in order for her to jump onto a project, she needs to really relate in some way, like deeply relate to what she's doing. And I really feel that, and I really felt that on set. She is, as far as movie stars go, a total non-movie star in the way that she behaves. Like, you saw the scenes at the hotel. She would just sit on the couch, never go back to a trailer, sit there and wait, kind of happy to kind of engage, really, really kind of beautiful to everybody on the set. Just such a divine person. And I think as she's growing up, talk about someone aging like a fine wine. Like, I had a crush on Nicole when I was a kid. Has anyone seen BMX Bandits? Okay. If this was Australia, everyone's hand would go up. Nicole started out in a movie called BMX Bandits. She was like 17. She had a shock of like curly red hair. I think maybe that's what Tom Cruise saw, and he went, Days of Thunder. In fact, Russell one day on set kept telling everybody about BMX Bandits, and Nicole kept going, "Oh, Russell, shut up." Russell went and got 20 T-shirts printed with Nicole's face on it from the poster from BMX Bandits. And it was one of the church scenes, and Nicole rocks up. Nicole rocks up, and she's like, she sees the grip. She's like, BMX Bandits T-shirt. And then 20 other people. That was Russell's prank on Nicole. She took it very good-naturedly. But Nicole's like the greatest person in the world. If I have another chance to work with her again, I'll do it in a heartbeat.
Oh, you're giving her such a great role. I'm pretty sure it's going to work once again with you. I mean, the scene, it's a breathtaking scene where she actually takes control and actually looks after Garrett. It's incredible. I read that Russell Crowe visited Conley's church, and can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Just to acknowledge that, I think there's something really beautiful about Martha, the real mother's turnaround, that's so timely as well. About, there's so much of my own mother and father in this film as well. It's part of also why I relate to it. So often a man is like the voice of the household, and a woman is often, it's almost like a really old paradigm. It's an old kind of dynamic that still really exists. And it's so wonderful to see a woman who, when you meet her, you'd pass her off as like the second fiddle and just an agreeable woman. Suddenly, and even to this day, kind of has control over that family because she trusted her instinct and she chose her son over. And again, talking about God, like staring into the face of an age-old, handed down sort of belief system, was willing to redesign that, and she truly is a hero. Getting to Russell, turning up to church, Russell called me one day and he goes, "Mate, do you think Focus would fly me down to Arkansas to go visit Herschel in a private jet?" And I was like, "Dude, we need money for the film. Like, we got no money left. Like, Focus aren't going to fly you down to Arkansas." And he's like, "All right, mate." Yeah. Next day, I find out Russell's chartered his own private jet because he has got a little bit of money, I think, left over from Gladiator. I'm pretty certain. And all the other movies. Because, Russell was like a $20 million guy. He was one of the last $20 million guys. I mean, like $20 million for a movie. Right? People should get $20 million for digging trenches all day. Actors get an easy ride. So anyway, he broke off a little of that money and he got a private jet. And he'd spoken to Herschel on the phone. And, I'd been to the church. It's a corrugated iron church with about probably half the amount of people that are here. And he's a rock star in that community. I'm talking about Garrett's father. I mean, when you're a Baptist preacher, you're a local rock star, right? So Russell flies down to the nearest possible landing strip and he waits 5 minutes into the sermon and he just quietly walks in and he sits up the back. And nobody knows because they're all facing the front until someone comes up and gives Herschel a message at the pulpit. And on her way back to her seat in the pulpit, she's like, "Gladiators up the back," And word got around, like whispers got around the church, and everybody suddenly realised that, Rusty was in the house. Which is just like, consider it small town Arkansas, 200 miles up the road from where the hub of the KKK is, right? and there's Russell just sitting up the back. And then Herschel and him had lunch afterwards, and that pen that you see in the movie, Herschel gave him that pen. And quite often on set, I'd see Russell texting on his phone, and he had a communication with Herschel. So as much as I call it, you know, if Martha's done a full, you know, U-turn in terms of her opinion, the father's trying as well, just like she has power steering and he doesn't. So he's still like trying to find his way back. But he was complicit in the film. He never tried to stop me from making it. He, to this day, if I text him, he'll text me straight back. He's aware of the film. But he liked the book, which he hadn't read for a long time. He probably won't see the film until he'll be able to watch it quietly in his home on a streaming platform.
Your film is raising so much awareness in this day and age. Right at this moment, there are so many conversion therapy centers across the country, across the world, and they're legal. You know, is your hope that people are starting to understand that we need to stop this?
Look, the macro the macro dream is that we are at least a big part of putting an end to conversion therapy. I mean, the Trevor Project. There's a website called stoperasing.com in conjunction with the film. I'd urge you to go and check out just what the situation is and other ways that you can lend your voice, because like as an ally I think you can be inflamed, but it helps to write a message to a local politician or do anything you can to end it. Love in Action actually started probably within 200 miles from here. Northern California was where the first place that John Schmidt, my character's based on a guy called John Schmidt, he went here and then he moved and opened up Memphis. So there's a way that you can lend your voice. If we could end conversion therapy, that would be incredible. We're already getting a lot of messages online about people who individually their lives are being affected by it. I mean, for example, we got a tweet from somebody who said, I just watched Boy Erased and I drove 5 hours to come out to my parents. And the message continued saying they would probably know if they ever searched for me online, as in maybe Facebook or whatever, they would probably be aware. But he said, but I'd never explicitly had the conversation with them. So there's like it's an identifier for individuals. I think it's a little bit of a roadmap for parents, but as I say, on a bigger scale aspect, I would love if we're like that final chop that topples the tree, because there's a lot of focus on it. Miseducation of Cameron Post was another movie that came out this year. New York Times have written a number of articles about it. There's a lot of focus on it, and I have a feeling the end is near.
Well, yeah, absolutely. What I'm so grateful to you and your film is that the message that sends out is that what should be obvious is that sexuality, there's no fixing your sexuality, but what we can fix is acceptance and loving one another. So
I think that's really the message for parents. And then the more and more I got deeper into cutting the film, I was like, young people know. I think I have faith in the next generation. Like people like Troye Sivan and the galvanization of young people online. I think there's, as Glad pointed out to us, because we were aligned with Glad throughout the whole making of the film. It's like back when I was growing up, they say like 9-10% of people, between the ages of 15 to 25 identified as gay or on the spectrum, on that fluid spectrum, 9 to 10%. That statistic now is actually 20 2% or 21%. And I have faith in the next generation. What this film really is for that the parents who are faced with how do you deal with that conversation. And, the path of least resistance is love and acceptance. There's so much chaos and drama and pain and separation and homelessness and death that can be born out of rejection. And I think a lot of people in the aftermath of that learn to really, really regret that decision. And sometimes it's irreversible, sadly. But I don't think for the most part it is irreversible. It doesn't hurt to look back and go, I made a wrong choice. And sometimes it's a phone call or a meeting with parents and their kids just to go, I know I said this thing to you, but I want to re-examine that.
Well, bless you, and thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.